The recruitment hall buzzed with nervous energy as hundreds of cadets from dozens of worlds waited for their assignments. Alex Chen sat quietly in the back row, watching the chaos unfold around him. Unlike the other humans who clustered together, talking loudly about their test scores and family connections, Alex preferred to observe. Growing up on a farm had taught him that you learned more by listening than by talking. 3 figures entered the hall with the kind of authority that made conversations die instantly. Commander Ralph moved like a predator, his scaled green skin catching the light as his yellow eyes swept across the assembled cadets. Professor Nix floated slightly above the ground, her crystalline body refracting light into rainbow patterns that hurt to look at directly. Captain Voss clicked across the floor on 6 legs, his compound eyes taking in everything at once while his mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. These were the Academy's most feared instructors. Everyone knew their reputation. They had never passed a human cadet in their advanced programs. Not one. The 3 aliens made no secret of their belief that humans were too primitive, too emotional, and too weak to belong among the galaxy's elite military forces. Today we select candidates for our specialized training programs, Rolf announced, his voice carrying easily through the large hall. As always, we will choose only the most promising specimens. Alex noticed how Rolf said specimens instead of cadets. It was a small thing, but telling. To these instructors, they were all just test subjects. The selection process began immediately. Rolf called out names for tactical assessment, his choices seeming random to most observers. But Alex saw the pattern. The commander was picking the humans who looked most confident, the ones who had been bragging about their scores. Professor Nix selected cadets for intellectual evaluation, again focusing on humans who had been loudly discussing their academic achievements. Captain Voss chose candidates for physical trials, targeting the humans who looked most athletic. Alex understood what was happening. These instructors weren't looking for the best candidates. They were looking for the humans most likely to fail spectacularly. This was a setup, designed to prove their point about human inferiority. As the selections continued, Alex found himself increasingly overlooked. His test scores were average across the board. He hadn't bragged about anything. He looked like exactly what he was as a farm kid from a small town who had joined the military because it seemed like a better option than staying home to watch the family farm slowly fail. The other human cadets were getting nervous as more names were called. Some looked relieved when they weren't chosen, having heard the stories about what happened to humans in these advanced programs. Others looked disappointed, their dreams of proving themselves slipping away. "We need one more," Professor Nix said, her crystalline voice ringing like struck glass. Something different this time. Alex felt 6 compound eyes focus on him as Captain Voss studied the remaining candidates. The insectoid's head tilted and his mandibles clicked faster. "That one," Voss said, pointing directly at Alex. "The quiet one in the back." Rolf and Nix turned to look. Alex could feel their assessment like a physical weight. He met their gaze steadily, the way he had learned to face down angry bulls and suspicious creditors back home. "Interesting choice," Rolf mused. "Average scores across all categories. No special achievements. No family military history." "Perfect," Nix added, her tone making it clear she didn't mean it as a compliment. "A completely unremarkable specimen." Alex stood when his name was called, ignoring the whispers from the other cadets. Some looked sympathetic, others grateful it wasn't them. A few seemed confused about why he had been chosen when there were clearly more impressive candidates available. As he walked toward the front of the hall, Alex caught fragments of conversation from the instructors. "The presentation to the board is next month," Rolf was saying quietly. "We need clear evidence of human limitations." "This one should provide exactly that," Nix replied. "Look at him. Completely ordinary." "Sometimes ordinary can surprise you." Voss clicked, but his tone suggested he didn't really believe it. Alex reached the front and stood at attention. He had learned military bearing during basic training, even if he hadn't excelled at much else. The 3 instructors circled him like predators examining prey. "Do you know why you were selected, Cadet Chen?" Rolf asked. Alex considered several possible answers. He could play dumb, pretend he didn't understand what was really happening. He could try to impress them with false confidence. He could even withdraw from consideration. Instead, he chose honesty. "I believe you think I'll fail, sir." The answer clearly surprised them. Nix's crystalline form pulsed brighter, and Voss's clicking increased in tempo. Rolf's scaled features shifted into what might have been approval. "At least you're not delusional," Rolf said. "Most of your species suffer from excessive optimism." "Optimism has its place, sir," Alex replied carefully. "But so does realism." "We'll see how realistic you are when the challenges begin," Professor Nix said. "You'll be tested in tactical thinking, technological adaptation, and physical conditioning. The standards are the same for all species." "I understand, ma'am." Captain Voss leaned closer, his compound eyes reflecting Alex's image dozens of times. "Why did you join the military, human? Your file says you could have stayed on your family's farm." Alex thought about the failing crops, the mounting debts, and the slow death of everything his family had built over generations. He thought about his parents aging too fast from worry and work. He thought about the choice between watching it all collapse or trying to build something better. "The farm taught me that sometimes you have to leave what you know to find what you need." "Sir?" The answer hung in the air for a moment. Then Ralph dismissed him with a wave of his clawed hand. "Report to Training Complex 7 at 0600 tomorrow. Don't be late." As Alex walked back to his seat, he could hear the instructors already discussing their plans. They were confident, excited even. They had found their perfect example of human mediocrity. Alex settled into his chair and went back to watching and listening. Around him, the other cadets offered quiet condolences or nervous jokes about his chances. He accepted them all with the same calm expression. What none of them knew, including the instructors, was that Alex had spent his entire life being underestimated. Teachers had dismissed him as a slow farm kid. Classmates had ignored him as boring. Even his own parents had assumed he would never amount to much beyond maintaining their struggling farm. But Alex had learned something important during those years of being overlooked. People saw what they expected to see, and when they expected to see failure, they often missed the signs of something else entirely. Tomorrow would be interesting. The training complex felt like stepping inside a machine designed by hostile minds. Alex arrived 15 minutes early, a habit formed by years of farm chores that couldn't wait for convenience. The facility stretched across several acres, filled with simulation chambers, physical training areas, and testing laboratories that hummed with alien technology. Commander Ralph waited in the tactical simulation center, his scaled fingers dancing across holographic controls. The room erupted into a three-dimensional battlefield as Alex entered, complete with terrain features, weather patterns, and moving enemy forces. "Your first challenge, human," Ralph said without looking up. "A classic tactical scenario. You command a battalion defending this mountain pass against overwhelming enemy forces. Every military academy in the galaxy uses this simulation. The average cadet lasts 14 minutes before total defeat." Alex studied the tactical display floating before him. The enemy force outnumbered his defenders 3-1, with superior equipment and air support. The mountain pass offered some defensive advantages, but not enough to offset the numerical disadvantage using conventional tactics. "What's my objective, sir?" "Survive as long as possible while inflicting maximum enemy casualties," Rolf replied, settling back to watch the inevitable failure. "Begin when ready." Alex activated the simulation and immediately began doing things that made Rolf's yellow eyes narrow with confusion. Instead of positioning his forces in the obvious defensive choke points, Alex spread them across the mountainside in small, seemingly random groups. Rather than concentrating firepower, he divided his heaviest weapons among these scattered positions. "What are you doing?" Rolf demanded. "You're violating every principle of defensive warfare." "I'm adapting to the terrain, sir," Alex replied, his attention focused on the developing battle. "Back home we had problems with coyotes attacking our livestock. Direct confrontation never worked because they were too numerous and too clever. The enemy forces advanced confidently into what appeared to be a poorly defended pass. Alex's scattered groups let them pass, then began attacking supply lines and communication networks from concealed positions. Instead of a conventional battle, the simulation became a series of hit-and-run attacks that gradually wore down the larger force. Ralph watched his carefully designed, overwhelming attack scenario turn into something resembling a guerrilla warfare exercise. This wasn't how the simulation was supposed to work. Cadets were meant to attempt heroic last stands, demonstrating either tactical brilliance or spectacular failure. They weren't supposed to turn it into something completely different. "You're not fighting a proper battle," Ralph protested. This is mere harassment. The coyotes didn't fight proper battles either, sir, Alex said calmly, directing another hit-and-run attack against an enemy supply convoy. But they were very effective until we learned to fight on their terms instead of ours. By the 30-minute mark, Alex's battalion was still operational, and the enemy force was becoming increasingly frustrated and disorganized. Their technological superiority meant nothing when they couldn't locate targets, and their numerical advantage was meaningless when they couldn't bring it to bear effectively. Professor Nix took over for the intellectual assessment, her crystalline form pulsing with barely controlled irritation. She had observed the tactical exercise with growing concern about their chosen candidate. "Perhaps you simply have an unusual approach to military problems," she said, her voice like breaking glass. "But warfare is becoming increasingly technological. Raw cleverness cannot compensate for intellectual limitations." The testing chamber filled with complex mechanical puzzles, each more intricate than the last. Alien technologies that required understanding of physics principles, mathematical relationships, and logical thinking that supposedly challenged the galaxy's brightest minds. Alex approached the first puzzle, a mechanical maze that required precise manipulation of energy, flows through crystalline conduits. Instead of trying to understand the underlying scientific principles, he began experimenting with direct manipulation, testing what happened when he changed various settings. "You must understand the theoretical framework first," Nix insisted. "Random experimentation will only lead to system failures." "With respect, Professor, this reminds me of our old tractor back home," Alex replied, his hands moving confidently through the puzzle. "The manual was written in technical language I never learned, but I could still figure out how to make it work when it broke down." He solved the first puzzle in half the expected time, not through theoretical understanding but through practical intuition about how mechanical systems behaved. The second puzzle involved manipulating electromagnetic fields to create stable energy patterns. Again, Alex ignored the mathematical formulas floating nearby and worked directly with the system until he found configurations that worked. Nix's crystalline structure flickered with confusion and growing alarm. These puzzles were designed to require advanced theoretical knowledge. Solving them through pure experimentation should have been impossible within the time constraints. "This is highly irregular," she muttered, loading an even more complex challenge. "You're not following proper analytical procedures." "My father used to say that understanding and fixing weren't always the same thing," Alex replied, already working on the new puzzle. "Sometimes you need to understand how something works. Sometimes you just need to make it work." Captain Voss took charge of the physical assessment with visible relief. Finally, they would see clear human limitations. Physical capabilities were measurable, quantifiable, and impossible to fake or work around through cleverness. The obstacle course stretched across a quarter-mile of challenging terrain. Walls to climb, barriers to leap, weights to carry, and endurance tests that pushed most cadets to their absolute limits. Voss had designed it personally to showcase the superiority of his species' enhanced reflexes and multi-limbed advantages. "Physical conditioning is the foundation of military effectiveness," he announced, his mandibles clicking with satisfaction. "This course will demonstrate the realities of biological limitations." Alex studied the course layout, noting the emphasis on raw speed and agility. Most of the obstacles seemed designed for candidates with enhanced reflexes or multiple limbs. It was clearly meant to make humans look clumsy and inadequate. "Begin when ready, human." Alex started at a pace that made Voss's compound eyes widen with surprise. Not because it was particularly fast, but because it was incredibly steady. While other cadets attacked obstacles with bursts of energy that left them exhausted, Alex maintained the same consistent rhythm throughout. At the climbing wall, instead of trying to match the speed of multi-limbed species, Alex used techniques borrowed from years of climbing grain silos and barn roofs. His movements were efficient rather than flashy, conserving energy for the challenges ahead. The weight-carrying segment was designed to favor species with natural strength advantages. Alex couldn't lift as much as some aliens, but he could carry moderate weights much farther than expected. Farm work had built the kind of endurance that came from moving hay bales and feed sacks all day. Every day, regardless of weather or fatigue. By the halfway point, cadets with superior natural abilities were beginning to flag. Their enhanced reflexes and specialized physiology had allowed them to attack the early obstacles aggressively, but they lacked the steady endurance needed for the full course. Alex passed several exhausted candidates and kept going at the same measured pace he had maintained from the beginning. When he crossed the finish line, he wasn't the fastest finisher, but he was far from the slowest, and he looked like he could run the course again if necessary. Voss stared at his timing displays with growing agitation. The results didn't match his expectations at all. This ordinary human shouldn't have performed so well against candidates with clear biological advantages. The three instructors gathered afterward to discuss their chosen candidate. The conversation was tense and confused. "There must be something wrong with our testing methods," Nix insisted. "These results are completely anomalous." "Perhaps we simply chose poorly," Ralph admitted reluctantly. "Maybe this one isn't as ordinary as he appeared." "No," Voss clicked firmly. "Look at his records again. Average scores across all categories. Nothing special about his background or training. This has to be statistical variance." They agreed to intensify the challenges. Whatever was happening with this human cadet, they would push him until his limitations became clear. Their presentation to the Academy Board depended on it. Alex, meanwhile, reported to his quarters and wrote a brief letter home. He told his parents that training was going well, and that he was learning interesting things about expectations versus reality. He didn't mention that he was beginning to suspect his instructors were learning some lessons too, whether they wanted to or not. 3 days of intensive testing had left the instructors more frustrated than they had ever been with a single cadet. Alex Chen continued to exceed their carefully calculated expectations in the most irritating ways possible. Not through brilliance or exceptional ability, but through an almost supernatural knack for finding practical solutions to problems, designed to have no practical solutions. Professor Nix decided to escalate her technological challenges to scenarios. That should have been impossible for someone with Alex's educational background. She loaded a simulation that required repairing a damaged starship engine while under combat conditions, using only salvaged parts and basic tools. This exercise requires advanced knowledge of hyperdrive mechanics, quantum field manipulation, and emergency engineering protocols, she announced, her crystalline form pulsing with confident authority. The scenario is based on real combat situations where theoretical knowledge becomes a matter of life and death. The simulation environment materialized around Alex, complete with sparking control panels, damaged conduits, and the constant rumble of weapon impacts against the ship's hull. Emergency lights flashed as computer systems announced critical failures in multiple languages. Alex ignored the technical readouts and focused on the actual damaged equipment. He had never seen a hyperdrive before, but engines were engines in many ways. They had power sources, moving parts, and systems that either worked or didn't. "You must begin with a complete diagnostic analysis," Nix insisted. "The technical manuals are available through the computer interface." Instead, Alex began tracing power conduits with his hands, listening to the sounds the machinery made, and watching how different components behaved when he adjusted their settings. Within minutes, he had identified 3 critical failures that the diagnostic systems had missed entirely. "This coupling here is vibrating wrong," he said, pointing to a component that looked perfectly normal to Nix's enhanced perception. "Back home, when our water pump started making this kind of sound, it meant the bearings were about to fail. And this power relay is running too hot. You can smell the insulation burning." Nix checked her instruments frantically. Alex was correct on both counts, but how could he possibly know that without running proper diagnostics? "You're ignoring established procedures," she protested. "Proper analysis requires systematic testing protocols." "Maybe," Alex replied, already working on repairs with salvaged materials. "But when something's broken and you need it fixed fast, sometimes you have to trust your hands and ears more than your manuals." He completed the repairs in record time, using techniques that violated every engineering principle Nix had ever learned, but somehow worked perfectly. The hyperdrive came online with a smooth hum that sounded better than it had before the damage occurred. Commander Ralph responded by designing tactical scenarios that grew increasingly complex and unfair. If unconventional thinking was Alex's strength, then Ralph would create situations where unconventional thinking led to disaster. "Urban warfare," he announced grimly. "Your unit must clear a hostile city while minimizing civilian casualties and preserving infrastructure." The enemy has integrated themselves completely into the civilian population. The simulation created a maze of narrow streets, crowded buildings, and hidden threats. Enemy combatants used schools, hospitals, and residential areas as bases of operation, making conventional military tactics nearly impossible without causing massive collateral damage. Most cadets approached urban warfare with either overwhelming force that destroyed everything or cautious tactics that allowed enemies to escape. Both approaches typically resulted in mission failure. Alex studied the situation and began implementing strategies that made Rolth scaled hide crawl with professional horror. "You're splitting your forces into impossibly small units," Rolth observed. "This violates every principle of unit cohesion and command control." "We use similar tactics during harvest season," Alex explained calmly, directing his scattered units through the simulated city. "When you're working multiple fields simultaneously, you have to trust small teams to handle their areas independently while maintaining overall coordination." Instead of fighting the enemy directly, Alex's units began focusing on winning over the civilian population. They provided medical aid, shared rations, and helped repair infrastructure damaged by the conflict. Within the simulation, civilians began providing intelligence about enemy positions and movements. "This isn't warfare," Rolth protested. "You're conducting a social work program." "My grandfather always said that most problems got easier when you had the community on your side," Alex replied. "Seems to work the same way here." By the end of the exercise, Alex's forces had neutralized most enemy positions with minimal casualties on all sides. The civilian population was actively cooperating, infrastructure remained largely intact, and the enemy had been isolated and demoralized by their loss of popular support. Rolth stared at the results with growing anxiety. This wasn't how military simulations were supposed to work. Where was the heroic combat? Where were the difficult tactical decisions? Where was the clear demonstration of human limitations? Captain Voss decided to abandon subtlety entirely. If regular physical challenges weren't revealing this human's weaknesses, then extreme challenges would. "Survival training," he announced, his compound eyes glittering with anticipation. "Hostile environment, limited resources, multiple environmental hazards. This will test your species' famous adaptability under truly adverse conditions." The simulation dropped Alex into a frozen wasteland with sub-zero temperatures, limited supplies, and weather conditions that changed from blizzard to clear skies without warning. Most cadets either froze to death or exhausted themselves trying to maintain body temperature in inadequate shelters. Alex began by finding a sheltered location and building what looked like an inefficient lean-to shelter. Then he started doing things that made no sense from Voss's perspective. "Why are you gathering those plants?" Voss demanded. "They have no nutritional value and waste energy to collect." "They're not for eating," Alex replied, weaving the plants into insulating mats. "We used to use similar stuff to line chicken coops back home. Keeps the cold out better than you'd think." Within hours, Alex had transformed his simple shelter into something that maintained comfortable temperatures while using minimal energy. He found water sources that other cadets missed, identified edible plants that looked poisonous to alien perception, and created tools from materials that seemed completely useless. "This is impossible," Voss clicked frantically. "The environmental parameters should make survival extremely difficult for your species." "Cold's just cold," Alex said matter-of-factly, tending a small fire he had built inside his shelter without filling it with smoke. "Growing up, we lost power every winter during ice storms. You learn to keep warm with what you have instead of what you wish you had." The three instructors held an emergency conference that evening. Their carefully chosen demonstration of human inadequacy was turning into an accidental showcase of human competence. "We need to acknowledge the possibility that we made an error in selection," Nick said reluctantly, her crystalline structure flickering with agitation. "No," Rolth insisted. "Look at his files again. Nothing about his background suggests exceptional ability. This has to be some kind of fluke. Or maybe," Voss clicked slowly, "we don't understand what we're looking at." They decided on a final test that would resolve the situation once and for all. If Alex Chen was somehow exceptional despite all evidence to the contrary, then they would put him in a situation where exceptions meant nothing. They would test him under conditions where his unusual background couldn't possibly provide any advantage. "Tomorrow we implement the comprehensive survival protocol," Rolth announced. All three of us will accompany the subject to an actual hostile environment. No simulations, no safety protocols, no technological assistance. Are you certain that's wise? Nix asked. If our assessment of his capabilities is incorrect, then we'll discover that quickly enough, Voss replied grimly. Better to learn the truth now than be surprised during our presentation to the board. None of them considered the possibility that they might be the ones surprised by what they learned. After all, they were the instructors, the experts, the representatives of advanced civilizations. What could one ordinary human possibly teach them? Alex, meanwhile, spent the evening writing another letter home. He mentioned that his training was becoming more interesting and that he was looking forward to some practical fieldwork. He didn't mention that his instructors seemed to be getting more desperate with each passing day, or that he was beginning to suspect tomorrow might be very educational for everyone involved. The transport shuttle descended through thick gray clouds toward a world that seemed designed to be hostile to life. Kessera Prime was a swamp planet used exclusively for advanced survival training, where the weather changed without warning and the local ecosystem treated everything as either food or a threat. Alex pressed his face to the viewport, watching endless stretches of murky water, twisted trees, and fog-shrouded islands pass below. The landscape looked familiar in a way that made him almost homesick. It reminded him of the wetlands behind his family's farm, where he had spent countless hours as a child learning to fish, hunt, and navigate by reading natural signs instead of relying on technology. Second thoughts, human? Commander Rolth asked with satisfaction. His scaled features showed confident anticipation as he checked his survival gear one final time. This environment will test every aspect of survival capability under genuine field conditions. No, sir, Alex replied honestly. It looks like interesting country. Professor Nix's crystalline form pulsed with skeptical light. Interesting is hardly the appropriate term. Kessera Prime has a 93% rainfall rate, unpredictable weather patterns, and wildlife that has evolved to be extremely aggressive toward unfamiliar species. Plus, the water isn't safe to drink without proper filtration, Captain Voss added, his mandibles clicking with anticipation. The plant life is largely inedible to most species, and shelter construction is complicated by unstable soil conditions and frequent flooding. Alex nodded respectfully, but privately he was thinking about all the times he had camped in similar terrain back home. Swampland had its challenges, but it also provided everything you needed to survive if you knew how to look for it. The shuttle landed on one of the few solid patches of ground, a small island surrounded by shallow water and thick vegetation. As the boarding ramp lowered, humid air rushed in carrying the rich scents of growing things, stagnant water, and decomposing organic matter. The pickup will occur at these coordinates in 72 hours, the pilot announced. Emergency beacons are available if the situation becomes life-threatening. Rolth, Nix, and Voss emerged from the shuttle with the confidence of individuals who had supervised countless survival exercises. They carried standard-issue survival packs containing water purification tablets, emergency rations, thermal regulation, gear, and basic tools designed for hostile environment operations. Alex followed with a pack that looked identical, but his approach to the environment was immediately different. While the instructors began scanning for threats and calculating resource availability, Alex was reading the landscape the way a farmer reads soil conditions. We should establish a perimeter and conduct a systematic survey of available resources, Rolth announced, pulling out a tactical scanner. Proper planning prevents most survival emergencies. Agreed, Nix replied, activating her own instruments. I'm detecting elevated bacterial levels in the water supply and potentially toxic compounds in most of the visible vegetation. Alex knelt by the water's edge and cupped some in his hands, examining the color and clarity before sniffing it carefully. Water's not too bad, he observed. Needs filtering, but it's moving water, not stagnant, should be workable. You can't possibly determine water quality through primitive sensory evaluation, Nix protested. My instruments indicate significant contamination levels. Maybe, Alex replied, already moving toward a cluster of plants growing near the shore. But back home we drank well water that would probably fail most purity tests. The question isn't whether it's perfect, it's whether it'll keep you alive. The first few hours seemed to confirm the instructor's expectations. They established a defensive camp using their technological advantages, deployed sensors to monitor the local environment, and began rationing their supplies according to standard survival protocols. Alex worked nearby, building what looked like a much more primitive shelter using local materials. He wove branches together in patterns that seemed random, but created surprisingly strong structures. He dug small channels to direct water flow away from their camp area. He gathered plants that looked completely inedible to alien perception. "Your shelter construction appears inadequate," Voss observed critically. "That design will not provide adequate protection against the predicted weather patterns." "We'll see," Alex replied calmly, continuing his work. "Sometimes the simple approaches work better than you expect." The weather proved them both right and wrong. A sudden storm struck during their first night, bringing driving rain and winds that tested every shelter design. The instructors' technologically advanced camp held together, but barely, with their equipment working at maximum capacity to maintain livable conditions. Alex's improvised shelter not only survived the storm, but remained comfortable throughout. His water channels prevented flooding, his woven walls flexed with the wind instead of fighting it, and his construction methods actually improved as the materials swelled with moisture. "Fortunate coincidence," Rolf muttered the next morning, surveying the damage to their more sophisticated camp. But the coincidences kept multiplying. Alex found clean water sources that the instruments had missed. He identified edible plants by watching what the local wildlife consumed safely. He predicted weather changes by reading cloud formations and wind patterns instead of relying on meteorological sensors. By the second day, the instructors were beginning to struggle with conditions that Alex seemed to find merely challenging. Professor Nix's crystalline structure wasn't designed for high humidity environments, and she began developing efficiency problems as moisture interfered with her internal systems. "This environment is highly unsuitable for my physiology," she admitted, her usually bright glow becoming noticeably dimmer. "I require more controlled atmospheric conditions for optimal function." Captain Voss was having different but equally serious problems. His enhanced reflexes, designed for rapid response to threats, were creating difficulties in an environment where every sudden movement attracted attention from aggressive local wildlife. "The fauna here responds poorly to rapid motion," he clicked nervously after another encounter with territorial swamp creatures. "My natural reactions seem to escalate confrontations rather than avoid them." Commander Rolf was perhaps suffering most of all. His tactical expertise assumed controlled variables and predictable enemy behavior. The swamp environment changed constantly, the wildlife followed no logical patterns, and traditional military thinking provided no advantage against rain, mud, and the simple challenge of staying dry and fed. "This terrain is completely unsuitable for conventional tactical assessment," he complained, his usually immaculate appearance becoming bedraggled as their technological solutions proved inadequate for the organic chaos around them. Alex, meanwhile, seemed to be thriving. He moved through the environment with easy confidence, found food and shelter materials that others missed, and maintained his equipment using methods that looked primitive but worked consistently. "How did you know those berries were safe to eat?" Nix asked after Alex had identified a food source that their sensors had flagged as potentially dangerous. "Watch the birds," Alex explained simply. "If something can eat them without problems, there's a good chance they're safe for us too, at least in small amounts. You start with a tiny bit and see what happens." "That's hardly scientific methodology," Nix protested weakly. "No, ma'am," Alex agreed. "But it's practical methodology, and right now practical seems more useful than scientific." On the second night, their situation took a dramatic turn for the worse. A flash flood struck without warning, turning their stable campsite into a rushing stream that swept away most of their technological equipment. The instructors found themselves stranded in an alien environment with failing technology, dwindling supplies, and growing awareness that their expertise was useless against the simple challenges of staying alive in hostile conditions. Alex waded through the floodwaters with calm efficiency, salvaging what could be saved and accepting what was lost. He helped his struggling instructors to higher ground and began rebuilding their shelter, using methods that worked regardless of whether their technology functioned. "We should activate our emergency beacons," Rolf said, his confidence finally cracking. "This situation has exceeded acceptable risk parameters." "That's your call, sir," Alex replied, securing their remaining supplies against another possible flood. "But we've got another day before pickup, and the weather's starting to clear. Might be worth seeing if we can make it work." For the first time since the exercise began, the three instructors found themselves looking to their supposedly inferior human cadet for guidance. The reversal was subtle but unmistakable. Alex had become the leader by default, not through any dramatic demonstration of superiority, but simply by continuing to function effectively while their more sophisticated approaches failed. The realization was deeply uncomfortable for all three aliens. They had come here to prove human inferiority. Instead, they were discovering their own limitations in the most humbling way possible. The third morning brought a scene that would have been unthinkable when they first landed on Kisara Prime. Commander Ralph, Professor Nix, and Captain Voss sat huddled in a shelter built entirely by human hands, eating food found and prepared through human knowledge, while the cadet they had chosen to demonstrate human inadequacy worked quietly to ensure their continued survival. Alex moved through the morning routine with practiced efficiency, checking their water filtration system, tending the small fire that kept them warm and cooked their meals, and assessing the weather patterns that would determine their activities for the day. The three instructors watched him work with expressions ranging from bewilderment to barely concealed humiliation. "The protein paste in our emergency rations has been completely ruined by moisture infiltration," Professor Nix reported, her crystalline form flickering weakly in the humid air. "My internal systems are operating at 60% efficiency due to atmospheric conditions, and I'm experiencing significant difficulty with basic motor functions." She had been the first to accept reality. Her advanced intellect, usually her greatest strength, had become a liability when applied to problems that required intuitive understanding rather than analytical thinking. The swamp environment didn't respond to logical analysis. It simply was what it was, changing moment by moment according to patterns that couldn't be predicted or controlled. "I have located several grub species that appear to be edible," Alex said, returning from his morning foraging expedition. "They're not particularly appetizing by most standards, but they're high in protein and fat. Better nutrition than what's left of our emergency supplies." Captain Voss's compound eyes focused on the collection of pale, wriggling insects with obvious distaste. His enhanced reflexes had become a constant source of problems, triggering fight-or-flight responses to environmental stimuli that posed no actual threat. Every rustle of vegetation, every splash in the water, every unexpected sound caused involuntary reactions that either attracted dangerous attention or exhausted his energy reserves. "I cannot consume such primitive food sources," he clicked weakly. "My digestive system requires processed nutrition with controlled chemical compositions." "With respect, sir," Alex said gently, "your digestive system requires calories and nutrients. Everything else is preference, and right now we can't afford preferences." He prepared the grubs using techniques learned from camping trips with his grandfather, roasting them over the fire until they became crispy and almost palatable. The smell was foreign but not unpleasant, and the nutritional value was undeniable. Commander Ralph was perhaps suffering the most complete collapse of everything he had believed about himself and his abilities. His tactical expertise, honed through decades of military training and combat experience, provided no advantage against an environment that followed no tactical rules. "This terrain offers no defensive advantages," he muttered, staring at the endless expanse of water, mud, and vegetation. "There are no clear lines of sight, no elevation advantages, no choke points to control. How does one apply military strategy to chaos?" "You don't," Alex replied, offering him a portion of the cooked grubs. "Back home we had a saying, you can't fight the weather, you can only work with it. Same principle applies here." Ralph reluctantly accepted the food, his pride warring with his growing hunger. The emergency rations were gone. Their water purification tablets were nearly exhausted, and their technological solutions had proved inadequate to the simple challenge of staying alive in conditions their equipment wasn't designed to handle. The morning brought a new crisis that pushed their situation from uncomfortable to genuinely dangerous. A pack of local predators had been drawn to their camp by the scent of their remaining supplies. The creatures were roughly wolf-sized but moved through the swamp with amphibious grace, equally comfortable in water and on land. Captain Voss's enhanced reflexes immediately triggered, causing him to leap backward in a defensive posture that made him appear threatening to the predators. They responded with aggressive displays of their own, circling closer and vocalizing warnings that echoed across the water. Defensive formation, Rolth commanded instinctively, his military training taking over despite the inappropriateness of the response. "No, sir," Alex said firmly, stepping between the instructors and the approaching predators. "Stay very still and quiet. These aren't soldiers. They're animals protecting their territory. Different rules apply." Instead of confronting the predators, Alex began moving slowly and deliberately, making himself appear non-threatening while subtly encouraging the creatures to investigate their abandoned campsite, rather than the humans themselves. He scattered some of their remaining food supplies in the direction he wanted the predators to go, then led the group away from the confrontation entirely. "You're retreating," Rolth protested, his professional pride stung by the tactical withdrawal. "I'm avoiding an unnecessary fight," Alex corrected. "Those animals don't want to hurt us. They want food and to make sure we're not a threat to their young. Give them what they want and move somewhere else." Everyone wins. The strategy worked perfectly. The predators claimed the scattered supplies in the former campsite, while the humans relocated to a new area without violence or injury. But the move left them even more dependent on Alex's knowledge for basic survival. Professor Nix's condition continued to deteriorate as the humid environment wreaked havoc on her crystalline physiology. Her internal systems were clogging with moisture. Her energy efficiency was dropping steadily, and her usually sharp intellectual capabilities were becoming clouded and unreliable. "I require immediate medical attention," she announced, her voice distorting as her vocal systems malfunctioned. "My biological processes are failing under these conditions." Alex examined her carefully, noting the dimming of her internal light and the accumulation of condensation within her crystalline structure. He had no medical training for her species, but he understood the basic problem. Moisture was getting where it shouldn't be and interfering with essential functions. "We need to get you dried out," he said thoughtfully. "Not just surface drying. We need to remove the internal moisture that's causing the problems." Using techniques adapted from preserving electronics in humid conditions back home, Alex constructed a drying chamber around Professor Nix using warm, dry air from their fire and materials that absorbed excess moisture from the environment. It wasn't sophisticated medical treatment, but it addressed the fundamental problem causing her distress. "This is highly irregular treatment protocol," Nix protested weakly, but she didn't resist as the improvised therapy began showing results. Captain Voss faced a different but equally serious problem. His instinctive reactions were becoming increasingly problematic, as exhaustion made his enhanced reflexes even more unpredictable. He jumped at every sound, lashed out at perceived threats that didn't exist, and was burning through his energy reserves at an unsustainable rate. "You need to rest," Alex told him bluntly. "Your body is treating every stimulus like a life-or-death emergency. That's exhausting even for someone with enhanced capabilities." "I cannot simply disable my defensive responses," Voss clicked frantically. "They are integral to my survival instincts." "Then we need to change your environment so those instincts don't trigger constantly," Alex replied. "Sometimes the solution isn't to fight your nature. It's to put yourself somewhere. Your nature works better." He constructed a sheltered rest area that minimized unexpected stimuli while still allowing Voss to monitor their surroundings. The design worked with the insectoid's natural responses rather than against them, providing the security he needed to actually rest instead of maintaining constant vigilance. By midday, the role reversal was complete and undeniable. The three instructors, representatives of advanced civilizations with superior technology and specialized capabilities, were entirely dependent on the knowledge and skills of the human cadet they had chosen to demonstrate inferiority. Alex provided their food, maintained their shelter, treated their medical problems, and made the decisions that kept them alive. He did it all without arrogance or complaint, treating their dependence as a natural result of being in an environment that favored his background over theirs. "How is this possible?" Rolth asked during a brief moment of clarity. "Your species is supposed to be primitive. Your technology is centuries behind ours. Your physical capabilities are average at best." "Maybe," Alex replied, tending the fire that kept them warm and cooked their meals. "But right now, Primitive technology is working better than advanced technology. Average physical capabilities are proving more useful than specialized enhancements. And sometimes centuries of experience with difficult conditions matters more than theoretical knowledge. The afternoon brought their lowest moment yet. A second storm struck, more severe than the first, turning their world into a chaos of wind, rain, and rising water. Their remaining technological equipment failed entirely, leaving them with nothing but Alex's improvised solutions and growing understanding of their complete reversal of fortune. The three instructors found themselves literally eating mud. The emergency food sources Alex had prepared using local clay, insects, plant matter, and anything else that could provide nutrition. It was humble, unappetizing fare that represented the complete collapse of their assumptions about superiority and capability. "This is not how survival exercises are supposed to proceed," Nick said weakly, consuming the muddy mixture that was keeping her alive. "No, ma'am," Alex agreed. But sometimes reality doesn't follow the exercise parameters. As night fell, the three aliens huddled together in their human-built shelter, eating human-found food and depending entirely on human knowledge for their continued survival. The reversal was so complete it was almost surreal. Tomorrow would bring the rescue shuttle, but tonight brought the unavoidable realization that everything they had believed about human limitations was not just wrong, it was backwards. The rescue shuttle arrived precisely on schedule, its sleek form descending through the morning mist like salvation itself. The pilot's voice crackled over the communication system with professional efficiency, requesting status updates and confirming pickup coordinates. Alex helped his three instructors prepare for extraction, packing the few salvageable pieces of their equipment and ensuring everyone was ready for transport. The contrast between their current condition and their confident departure 3 days earlier was stark enough to be almost comical. Commander Rolf's usually pristine uniform was stained with mud and torn in several places. His scaled features showed exhaustion and something that might have been humility. Professor Nix's crystalline form, though improved by Alex's treatment, still flickered with reduced brightness and showed visible condensation damage. Captain Voss moved with uncharacteristic caution, his enhanced reflexes finally under control, but clearly strained by the extended stress. Alex looked much the same as when they had arrived, perhaps a bit dirtier but otherwise unaffected by their ordeal. He moved with the same calm efficiency he had shown throughout their survival exercise, treating their rescue as just another routine event rather than deliverance from disaster. "Status report," the pilot requested as they boarded the shuttle. The three instructors exchanged glances, each waiting for someone else to explain what had happened. The silence stretched uncomfortably until Alex stepped forward. "All personnel accounted for and in good health," he reported simply. "Training exercise completed successfully." During the flight back to the academy, the instructors sat in subdued silence while Alex gazed out the viewports at the swamp landscape passing below. He seemed genuinely interested in the terrain features and weather patterns, as if he were already planning how to handle similar conditions in the future. "Cadet Chen," Professor Nix said finally, her voice still slightly distorted by moisture damage. "Your performance during this exercise was highly irregular." "Yes, ma'am," Alex replied respectfully. "I hope it was still acceptable." The question hung in the air with uncomfortable implications. Acceptable by what standards? Using whose criteria? The traditional measures they had planned to apply seemed inadequate to describe what had actually occurred. "We need to discuss the implications of this exercise," Commander Rolf said carefully. "The results were not what we anticipated." "No, sir," Alex agreed. "But they were real results under real conditions. Sometimes that matters more than what you anticipate." Back at the academy, the three instructors faced an immediate crisis. Their presentation to the academy board was scheduled for the following day, but the carefully prepared demonstration of human inadequacy had become something entirely different. "We could simply report that the exercise was inconclusive," Captain Voss suggested during their emergency planning session. "Claim that environmental factors prevented proper assessment." "That would be dishonest," Nix replied, her academic integrity warring with her professional embarrassment. "The environmental factors were part of the test parameters. If we couldn't function under those conditions, that's data we should report. The question is whether we report it accurately or find a way to minimize the implications," Rolf added grimly. Our reputations and our positions depend on maintaining certain professional standards. They spent hours debating options, each more uncomfortable than the last. They could falsify their reports, admit partial failure, or acknowledge the complete reversal of their expectations. None of the choices were appealing. Meanwhile, Alex reported to his quarters and wrote his final letter home from the training program. He told his parents that he had learned valuable lessons about the difference between knowledge and wisdom, theory and practice, assumptions and reality. He mentioned that his instructors had been very educational, though perhaps not in the ways they had originally intended. The next morning brought the Academy Board presentation. The assembled officials represented the galaxy's most prestigious military institutions, and their expectations were clear. They wanted concrete evidence to support continued restrictions on human advancement in elite military positions. Commander Rolth stood before the board with visible reluctance. His prepared presentation had been scrapped entirely, replaced by something that felt like professional suicide. "Honored board members," he began, "our assessment of human military potential has revealed findings that contradict our initial hypotheses." He described the tactical exercises where Alex had consistently found effective solutions to problems designed to have no good answers. He explained how unconventional approaches had succeeded where traditional methods failed. He admitted that rigid thinking had proven to be a liability rather than an asset. Professor Nix followed with her technological assessment, her crystalline form still showing signs of damage from their survival exercise. She described how practical intuition had overcome theoretical knowledge, how improvised solutions had outperformed sophisticated equipment, and how her own expertise had proven inadequate under real-world conditions. The subject demonstrated technological adaptation capabilities that exceeded our measurement parameters, she reported with obvious difficulty. Our testing methods may have been fundamentally flawed in their assumptions about the relationship between formal education and practical competence. Captain Voss provided the physical assessment with audible reluctance. He described how endurance had proven more valuable than enhanced capabilities, how steady performance had outweighed specialized advantages, and how his own enhanced physiology had become a disadvantage under survival conditions. The human subject's physical performance was superior to our expectations and, in many cases, superior to our own performance under identical conditions, he admitted, each word clearly painful. The board listened to these revelations with growing amazement. The presentation they had expected to hear was being turned completely upside down by the very instructors who had requested permission to conduct it. "Are you suggesting," the board chairman asked carefully, "that your assessment of human capabilities was incorrect?" The three instructors looked at each other, then back at the board. The moment of truth had arrived, and there was no dignified way to avoid it. "Yes, sir," Rolth replied. "Our assessment was not just incorrect, it was fundamentally backwards. We tested for the wrong capabilities using inappropriate methods and reached conclusions that were contradicted by actual performance under realistic conditions." The board's response was swift and decisive. Alex Chen was immediately transferred to the Academy's most advanced programs, with full access to elite military training previously reserved for the galaxy's supposedly superior species. His test scores were re-evaluated using criteria that emphasized practical competence over theoretical knowledge. The three instructors faced different consequences based on their responses to the situation. Commander Rolth, who had shown the greatest willingness to acknowledge his errors and learn from them, was assigned to develop new assessment methods that emphasized adaptability over rigid doctrine. His tactical expertise remained valuable, but it would now be applied with greater humility and broader perspective. Professor Nix was tasked with redesigning the Academy's technological training programs to include practical problem-solving alongside theoretical knowledge. Her experience with the failure of pure academic approaches had taught her valuable lessons about the relationship between understanding and application. Captain Voss faced the most difficult adjustment. His resistance to acknowledging the lessons of their experience led to his reassignment to less prestigious duties. Though he remained at the Academy as a cautionary example of how specialized advantages could become limiting factors under changing conditions. 6 months later, Alex Chen graduated at the top of his class from the Academy's most demanding program. His thesis on adaptive leadership under uncertain conditions became required reading for all advanced students regardless of species. During his graduation ceremony, he was approached by his former instructors who had requested permission to speak with him privately. "We owe you an apology," Ralph said simply. "We chose you because we believed you would fail. Instead, you succeeded in ways we never imagined possible." "You taught us more than we taught you," Nyx added, her crystalline form now fully recovered and brighter than before. "That was not our intention, but it may have been the most valuable outcome possible." Even Voss, though still struggling with the implications, managed a grudging acknowledgement. "Your performance exceeded our parameters in ways that challenged our fundamental assumptions about capability and superiority." Alex listened respectfully, then offered the response that had characterized his entire approach to their training program. "Thank you for the opportunity," he said sincerely. "I learned a lot too. Sometimes the best education happens when nobody gets what they expected." Years later, when Alex had become a respected officer serving alongside individuals from dozens of different worlds, he would occasionally think back to his time with the 3 instructors who had chosen him to prove human inadequacy. They had succeeded in proving something important, just not what they had intended. The galaxy was large enough for many different kinds of strength, many different approaches to problems, and many different ways of defining superiority. The key was recognizing that your way wasn't the only way, and sometimes the most valuable lessons came from the people you least expected to teach them. Back on his family's farm, his parents still kept the letters he had sent during his training. The final letter remained their favorite, not because of what it said about his success, but because of what it revealed about the kind of person their quiet farm boy had become. Sometimes, he had written, "The most important thing you can do is help others discover that they're not as different from you as they thought they were. Turns out we all eat mud sometimes. The difference is whether you complain about the taste or just appreciate that it's keeping you alive."